Hey y'all, I'm Hope, and today I'm putting together a TBR for the fantasy subreddit's bingo board challenge. I had never heard of this until a few days ago when Steph Love has posted a TBR for this, and I will link her video in the description down below. I thought it was really great, and I was excited to find out that this was a thing. And they do this bingo board challenge every year, apparently, where there's a 5x5 board, and the goal is to try and read one book for every prompt, and then talk about whatever you're reading with everybody else on the subreddit. I think this sounds like it's going to be so much fun. I'd never heard of it, and I'm very excited to give it a shot this year. So I'm putting together my list of books that I'm hoping to use to fulfill each of these prompts. There's quite a few of them because it is a 5x5, and there are also hard mode versions of each prompt, which I'm not really going to be paying attention to because I don't want to make it that much more challenging for myself. But I think this is going to be a fun goal to reach for, to strive for. I know I've done kind of big projects like this in the past that don't always go to plan, but I think it's really fun to kind of put these lists together and to at least try to read all of them. And I think let's just dive in because there are a lot of prompts to get through, so I'm going to be trying to move relatively quickly through them, and I'm just going to go one row at a time. So starting with row one, the very first prompt is to read a book with a title in the title. So this could be something like hero, soldier, lord, lieutenant. I think they give the example locksmith could be a job title, anything like that. And for this one I have chosen The Prison Healer by Lynette Noni because I think a healer is kind of a title, especially in fantasy books. You tend to see like somebody who is, their job is to be a healer. So I think this works. And also I love this cover. It's so pretty. I love purple and green together. But this one's about a woman who is a prison healer, and she ends up getting caught up in trying to protect a rebel queen who ends up in the prison. So prompt number 2 on row 1 is superheroes. So book with like superpowers, villains, all that kind of stuff. And I've chosen Vicious by V.E. Schwab since this is a story of kind of super villains, I believe, and the way that they acquire their superpowers. Prompt number 3 on row 1. If you see me looking over here, I apologize, my phone is over here with the prompts on it. This is to read something from the bottom of your TBR, something that you've been kind of languishing that you haven't read in a very long time, even though you meant to. And I've chosen The Vampire Lestat by Anne Rice. The Interview with the Vampire is one of my favorite books ever, and for some reason I've never continued on with the series. I even started this book, and I read like 100 pages, and then I stopped. So this is definitely at the bottom of my TBR, but it's something I really would like to get to finally. Row 1. Prompt 4 is magical realism, and I've chosen A Tale for the Time Being by Ruth Ozeki. This is a book I need to read for a class that I'm taking next semester, and I found a few different reviews that mention that there is a magical realism element. I believe it's something to do with ghosts, so that could be really cool. And then the very last prompt on this row is young adult, and I've chosen A Wicked Fox by Kat Cho. This is a book that my aunt gifted me a while back off of my wish list, and I've just never gotten around to reading it. But I think it sounds like it could be a very fun book. I've heard some really good reviews of it. Moving to row number 2, and the first prompt on this row is to read a book with mundane jobs, where the characters have like normal world jobs, but in a fantasy or sci-fi setting. And so I've chosen, I feel like a really obvious answer, but it's Legends and Lattes by Travis Baldree, where an orc is retiring from adventuring to open a coffee shop. The next prompt over is a book published in the 2000s, so from 2000 to 2009, and I've chosen The Years of Rice and Salt by Kim Stanley Robinson. This is another book I need to read for the same class, and I do have a physical copy. I don't have it up here right now because I need to do some cleaning on it. It's got a little bit of mold that I want to try and kill off as much as I can before I put it amongst my other books, and in fact I may just not really put it amongst my other books, but I've got it kind of quarantined right now until I can find some time to clean it. But this is a kind of long-spanning sci-fi book about like what if the Black Plague killed, I think it's like 99% of the population instead of the like 1/3 of the European population it killed, and what would the world look like if that had happened. The next prompt is Angels and Demons, and I've chosen The Angel of the Crows by Catherine Addison. I can't believe I forgot that author's name. She wrote one of my favorite books. But this one is a Sherlock Holmes retelling where the Sherlock Holmes character is a fallen angel named Crow. After that is the prompt 5 short stories, which is to read 5 short stories. And I think technically I will be hitting the hard mode prompt for this because I think it's to read a whole short story anthology. And I've chosen Spirits Abroad by Zen Cho, which is a series of 19 short stories that are all inspired by Malaysian mythology and folklore. And I think it sounds like it's going to be a lot of fun. And then the last prompt on this row is to read a horror book, and I've chosen My Heart is a Chainsaw by Stephen Graham Jones because I am hoping to read this in May anyway, and I also have just been meaning to read this since it came out because I pre-ordered it and I never got around to it. Next, row number 3, the first prompt here is to read a indie or self-published fantasy, sci-fi, or horror novel, and I've chosen Obsidian Island by Arden Powell. This is an author that I think last month or the month before, I think it was last month, it was March, I said I was kind of done with their work because I really didn't enjoy the last 2 things that I read from them. This is the last novel of theirs that I own, so I do want to go ahead and get it out of the way, but this is a self-published fantasy novel. I think it's like 400 and some pages, something like that. And everything else I've read from them has been novellas. It's all been very short, so I'm interested to see how this is going to go with a much longer work. But I wanted to go ahead and get this one kind of cleared off of my own TBR. Prompt 2 in this row is a book that is set in the Middle East or set in a setting inspired by the Middle East. So I've chosen We Hunt the Flame by Hafsa Faisal, which is set in, is it Arawiya, I think? Yeah. And that is a Middle Eastern inspired setting. And I think it's going to be a lot of fun because I've heard this is a very fun adventure story. And I think there's also a bit of romance in it as well, so that should be cool. Next up, we've got Multiverses, and I've chosen Space Between Worlds by Micaiah Johnson. Yeah, it's been a while since I got this book and I forgot the author's name for a moment. This one is about a woman who I believe finds out that in a bunch of different dimensions she has died, and so she's traveling between them trying to figure out what's happened. I don't really know what to expect for this one because I've heard a few people talk about it and I've heard some good reviews, but I genuinely just don't really get what this book is about. So I'm curious to see how I do with this one because I don't normally read this kind of like more grounded dimension hopping sci-fi. I really like more fantasy-esque sci-fi generally. So I'm curious to see how I feel about this one. And then the last prompt on this row is to read a book by a POC author, and I've chosen The Ivory Key by Akshaya Raman. I think every time I've shown this in a video, I've been like, look at this cover. It's because it's a really pretty book. But this one is a YA fantasy about some siblings who hate each other but have to work together to save their kingdom. Moving on to row number 4, and the first prompt here is a book club or read-along book. So you had to pick a book from one of the book clubs or read-alongs that has happened on the fantasy subreddit. They had a big spreadsheet that you could look at, and I've chosen The Unspoken Name by A.K. Larkwood because this is another one that my best friend read and loved, and she's been waiting for me to read it so that we can talk about it. And I know that the sequel recently came out as well, so I think this is going to be cool. I know my friend loved that the protagonist in this book makes a lot of like bad decisions, but understandable bad decisions, which is a thing I know I really like in books. Next up was novella, so I have chosen Untethered Sky by Fonda Lee, which is a new novella. It just came out, and I've been really looking forward to this. I just haven't had time to read it yet because of school, but this one is about a woman whose family is torn apart by a manticore attack, and she goes on to become a rock writer, and they are manticore hunters. The next prompt is Mythical Beasts, and I've chosen When Women Were Dragons. I think the hard mode for this was to choose something that wasn't dragons, but I don't have very many options. My other one was Untethered Sky, which I wanted to use for novella, so we're going with this one, with this dragon one, but this one is like an alternate version of our world where I think sometime in the 50s or 60s, a bunch of women turned into dragons and ate their husbands and disappeared. The next prompt here is Elemental Magic, and I've chosen Priory of the Orange Tree, mostly because I've seen several reviews that mentioned that it has elemental magic, and I was having trouble finding anything that fit this. So given that I saw 4 or 5 different people just in a very quick search that had mentioned that, I think this should work. It's also just a book I need to get to because it's been sitting on my shelf for ages. The prequel is now out and I haven't even begun to read this one. And then the very last prompt here is to read a retelling. And this one, I think the hard mode was to read a retelling that's not like Greek or Roman mythology. But I've chosen By Force Alone, which is an Arthurian retelling, which I think is going to be cool. I've heard this is very weird. Leanne from Leanne's Library reviewed this a while back and said it was just a very strange book. So I'm curious to see what that means precisely. And now we finally made it to the very last row, and the first prompt here is to read a book with a queer norm setting. So a setting where queerness is the norm. And I have chosen The Red Scholar's Wake by Elliot Davidard. This is part of her Zuya Universe series. It's not really like interconnected series, but it's a bunch of different books set in the same universe. And this one is a sapphic love story with a marriage of convenience, I believe. And it's about, I believe, a pirate who is also a ship. Like it's a pirate ship and a scholar. Correction, it's not a scholar. She's a bot maker. So they have these like little bots that do various things. And she makes those. The next prompt is to read a book with a coastal setting, and I've chosen Jade War by Fonda Lee. The full prompt on the subreddit's post was that it could be a coastal or island setting, and this is set on the island of Kekon, and I've been meaning to continue the series for a while now. I actually did start it. You can see I started a buddy read, and I never finished it because my friend and I both got too scared. We're like, she's gonna kill all our favorite characters, and we're scared. So this is my second Fonda Lee on this list, and that's okay because I love her writing, but I really need to get on with this one. The next prompt is Druid. This said it could be like a classic Druid, it could be Celtic priests, or it could be a magic user whose magic stems from nature. So there were a lot of options here for Druid, which was good because I had no idea what I was going to put for this. But I ended up finding in their kind of recommendations thread that they set up, someone had recommended the Jasmine Throne for this because one of the characters has nature magic to like control vines and flowers. So I think that sounds really interesting, and I've been meaning to read this one for a while now too. This one has not been languishing quite as long on my shelf, but this is one that my friend read, is still waiting for me to read it so we can talk about it. But she also had said that this was much slower and a denser read, and she reads very fast, so if she says it's a slow read, like I really know I'm gonna need to set aside some time for it and invest time in it. So I've kind of been putting it off until I had the mental space to do that. The penultimate prompt for this entire challenge is to read a book featuring robots, and I have chosen, what's the title? It'll come back to me. System Collapse by Martha Wells. This is the 7th, I believe, Murderbot book. It comes out later this year, and I am so freaking excited for this one. I love Murderbot. I really should try and do like a full reread, but I just don't know if I'm gonna have the time, but I love the Murderbot books, and I cannot wait to get my grabby hands on the next Murderbot book. And then the very last prompt here is sequel, and I've chosen He Who Drowned the World by Shelley Parker Chan. This is the sequel to a book I'm currently reading and absolutely loving, which is She Who Became the Sun. This is a historical fantasy. Emphasis on the historical, there's very little fantasy elements here, but is a historical fantasy set in a 14th century China, and everything about the first book is just brilliant. I love the characters, I love the kind of military strategy, I like the little bit of fantasy that there is. There's a lot of stuff with like ghosts happening, that's really fun. I think the setting is really interesting. This whole book is wonderful, and I'm so excited for the sequel. I think it follows a different character, so I'm really curious to see where this is going to go. But those are all of the books that I'm going to try and read for this challenge. I am not going to try and pick them up because they are very securely on this not very secure table. I'm not going to do that because I would probably drown myself in books trying to do that. But I'm excited. I do think I'm going to try and put together some sort of video project for this because I think it'll be a lot of fun, and yeah, that's kind of the plan. But that's all I have for today, and I really hope you've enjoyed this video. I apologize if it's kind of long, but I hope you've enjoyed it anyway. If you have, I hope you'll consider giving it a like, maybe even subscribing to see what comes next. I'm currently posting every Tuesday and Saturday, so there is more content coming soon, and I hope to see you in the next video. Bye.